Yeah, I think we've weathered this storm,
Think we're
or
on.
or we're weathering it. Oh, we're on. Hello. We're going to
Howdy.
stop talking shop and start talking to you, the listener, the viewer. This is the Prospect Weekly Roundup. I am David Dayen, executive editor. With me is our managing editor and uh, enterprising reporter, Ryan Cooper. Ryan, how you doing? Getting ready for a reporting trip about 10 feet away from your house or something today, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Well, a little more than 10 feet, maybe, I don't know, half a mile, but
Half a mile. Okay.
right down this, literally on the street that I live on. And uh yeah, it's been,
And
already
what is that for those of us in TV land that don't know?
it's a
Where are
comedy
you going?
rally here in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She's going to Wilkes University, the local private school there. Um Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe a little public service announcement for whoever's watching that, the last few days have been tough for me because for, my kid, my first baby started daycare and instantly got COVID. He
Just immediately upon an instant exposure to any other human being.
he did he we couldn't get him the vaccine. It wasn't available
Oh
yet.
no.
Um, and yeah, so we're pretty sure what happened is he did a little trial run at daycare, got COVID. Anyway, now my wife has it, but I got my vaccine and she hadn't gotten around to it yet. And so far, after like 4 days, I don't have it. I'm feeling great, feeling fine.
So
Um,
you're not going to create a super spreader event whereby through some butterfly effect, Kamala Harris contracts the virus.
it won't be me, but I would bet money this will be a super spreader event as is ripping through the whole town. And I hope
the
that Kamala got her shot like I did. I
the
imagine she
DNC was, I know that. Like I knew a lot of people that came back from the DNC with COVID. And but all right, well, fair warning to the vice president. Put up that plexiglass wall for more reasons than one.
get
Um,
just drive the little Pope mobile. Get one of those UPS, the new mail trucks they've got.
right.
UPS mail truck
Yeah.
coming out and just
Yeah.
get in that with the air.
All electric. Yeah. It's economical as well as being, for public safety. Um, all right. Well, so Harris is doing this barnstorming tour after the first item that we're going to talk about, which is Tuesday night's. Well, we can call it a debate. I don't know, massacre might be a better word for it, but this event between Harris and Donald Trump, where it was a bunch of rakes were laid out along the debate floor, and Donald Trump proceeded to step on every single one of them. What were your impressions?
Yeah, I went into that with some trepidation. I don't like watching, I think this is why I'm not a big sports fan. Like when I actually get into a team, I find it very nerve-wracking to actually watch the game. Um, like the men's national team for the World Cup, which is always just
Okay.
because they're terrible. Anyway, so yeah,
Yeah.
this was just a complete rout. Um, I we had some articles, Bob had one arguing that Kamala could have responded a little better. She felt very almost overcoached. She had like canned, as you said, sort of
Yeah.
set out all the rakes. And at a few points, Trump would say something and she would just sort of let it slide. But aside from that, yeah, she baited him into talking about stuff, and he would bring stuff up unprompted that sounded crazy. I wrote an article about how, Harris said that she had talked to world leaders and that they had said that they thought Trump was stupid and incompetent. And he responded by bringing up Hungary's dictator Viktor Orban, as
Right.
like this tribune of respected world leadership, guy who's, internationally notorious for being this tin pot, ruler of a small country. This guy is
I
not.
mean, here's the thing that's interesting about that. So, yes, to people who know, Viktor Orban is everything that you're saying, and I cut you off, but you were essentially saying he was a brutal dictator. To the 99% of Americans who have no idea who Viktor Orban is, it was just completely obscure. And I think that combination of something that sounds crazy to those who know and sounds impenetrable to those who don't was a hallmark of what this whole Trumpian rhetoric throughout the debate. He is so online, he is so immersed in these right-wing fever swamps that you need a glossary of terms to actually figure out what the hell he's talking about if you're not already immersed in that world. And so it comes off both as off-putting and alienating, and also to anyone who's even a little bit informed, uh, deranged.
Yeah. And Trump even said that referenced the fact that people call him a strong man. It's like, yeah, yeah, everyone says he's a dictator, but I trust him. He's a smart guy, tough guy. And you're like, what on earth? I mean, talk about an unforced error. I think that the biggest probably moment of the night was when Kamala basically nailed him on abortion. I mean, in terms of political significance, this is like top three issue probably in the election. And she just hammered home the fact that it was Trump who's responsible for Dobbs. He appointed three of the justices that voted to overturn Roe versus Wade. And when um, he pressed she pressed him on whether or not he would veto a national abortion ban. He wouldn't do it. He was squirrely. He was trying to split the difference there. I mean, that's just a classic pincher move because, if it would be nationally, that would be the smart thing to say for national politics, but he needs evangelicals who are expecting him correctly to sign an abortion ban if it does reach his desk. And so he just had to sound like a complete, squirming liar right there because that's what he is. And that was very well.
Yeah.
And I think that really, people will remember that part for sure.
Yeah, two things there. I mean, one, it was very clear because the first question I think that came out in the debate was Harris was asked about, the last 4 years of economic policy under Biden, and she sort of pivoted away, and it was a little bit shaky. And then the abortion question comes up, and it's very clear that this is the territory where Harris is most comfortable. She not only in the last month, where a lot of things she's had to sort of come up with her talking points or come up with her the way in which she'd approach a policy in the last month, because it just wasn't really part of what she was doing as vice president. But for 2 years, she's been honing and sharpening these arguments around Dobbs. Ever since the decision came down in 2022, she was essentially the lead attack dog, if you will, of the Biden-Harris administration on these issues, and she's very articulate around them. She understands all of the minutia. She understands what women are going through, and she's probably because she's talked to them directly, and she's able to forward whether it's talking about people bleeding out in parking lots or talking about women who have no other options to within their own state and have to travel, or are risking death because doctors are afraid to operate on them for fear of being accused of performing an abortion. She knows all that backwards and forwards, and the passion is there. You can just feel it. And once she hit that moment, I think she was kind of off and running in terms of understanding the tone of where she wanted to go. So that's one thing. On the economics, I think she's still working on that. On foreign policy, the same way. The second part I'd say is that you talk about this balancing act that Trump has around wanting to please the base and wanting to do what any normal politician would do and say the popular thing. That came up, I think, in more than one instance within not just the debate, but just within the broader scope of the Trump's dilemma with the Republican Party. Whether it's this week he was clamoring for a government shutdown, right? That's not something that's necessarily going to look good to the swing voters, but the hard right in his base want to attach a continuing resolution to fund the government with this thing called the SAVE Act, which would require a proof of citizenship before you can register to vote. And he's wanted that bill for a long time. I see we have a cat in the audience. He's wanted that bill for a long time, and now he's willing to shut down the government over it. It's the same thing with IVF. I mean, this is another area where he just sort of blurted out, okay, well, we should have the government fund IVF now, because he was getting attacked, saying that, well, the same thing applies from your abortion ruling to in vitro fertilization if you're killing embryos. And so what you essentially are setting the stage for is a ban on this fertilization and the ability for women to have a hard time to get pregnant. And he said, oh, well, I think I'm great on IVF. In fact, I think the government should pay for that. And I think or insurance companies should have to cover it. And Republicans were like, what are you talking about? We don't want this at all. In fact, the Senate voted on a bill called the Right to IVF Act back in June, and it included an insurance mandate. And every Republican except for Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski voted against it, including his vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance. And next week, Chuck Schumer is going to put that bill on the floor again to just, tighten, show this wedge, display this wedge between Trump and the party even further. And that's another issue where the far right doesn't like what Trump's selling, but Trump, knows that this is important to win the election. So he's cross-pressured on a number of fronts.
Yeah, I think a related thing we should probably mention was maybe the single most striking instance of fact checking during debate that I can remember, which is when Trump was going off on the crazy pro-lifer conspiracy theory idea that like abortion
Yes,
not only includes basic the line from them is that most abortions are like 2 days before the due date. That people are like, rather not have this kid. Let's just get rid of him. And which obviously not remotely the case. The vast majority of abortions happen in the very early stages of pregnancy. The ones that are later are almost exclusively due to like terrible medical problems, that sort of thing.
right.
But it goes further than that. With the really totally extreme case that abortions are happening after the child is born, that they take the newly born baby and just put it in the garbage, and that's legal. He's claiming that this is Democratic policy, and the moderator is like, it's not legal in any state to murder a baby.
This is funny because he actually got his lies wrong. This is all based on a very out of context quote of I believe it was Ralph Northam, who was the former governor of Virginia. And the first time, Trump actually brought this up twice during the debate. And the first time he brought it up, he said it was the governor of West Virginia. He actually got his lie wrong. And then he sort of realized that, oh, wait, the governor of West Virginia is a Republican. So he said the governor of West Virginia, but not the one that's doing a really good job right now, because the current governor of West Virginia is running for Senate and is going to probably become the senator, Jim Justice. So he wanted to make sure, after he said it wrong, he wanted to make sure, I'm not talking about Jim Justice, that's my guy. So he got it wrong. He got his lie wrong the first time, and then he corrected his own lie by the second time when he said it, attributing it falsely but correctly in his brain-addled, worm-eaten brain to the governor of Virginia, not West Virginia. So that was an amusing moment.
Yeah.
The other thing that we should probably talk about, which I think was maybe the biggest soundbite coming out of the debate, was the leap within just a matter of days from 4chan comment threads to a presidential debate of this concept of uh, Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, eating dogs and cats and pets, which is purely 100% a JD Vance interpretation of fabricated comments from the right wing fever swamps that goes into Trump's mouth within 2 days, talking about how these immigrants are eating pets and whatnot. And now we're hearing these stories coming out of Springfield, Ohio, and we should tell the whole story of Springfield, Ohio, right? This is a town that had some investment and some jobs that were available. It's a small town, and they needed workers. Haitian immigrants found out that this was a town that had some high-paying jobs available. There was an influx of Haitian immigrants into this town, and it's been pretty good for the town. They have had some strain on services in terms of, so for example, English language interpreters and also language lessons in the public schools, for example. But by and large, this has been a real benefit because these workers have now increased the economic output of the city and increased the tax base of the city, and has turned this city into what was a kind of a depressed Rust Belt town into something that's a little more thriving. To the extent that there are strains, it's the strains of dealing with an influx of people in any context, and there are particularities around the fact that they are Haitian immigrants. But now that this has bubbled up, you have Haitians getting death threats in Springfield. You have, I believe there were bomb threats called into the public schools, which were evacuated today. And just an ugly situation that's going on here. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to clarify. 2 days in a row, yesterday and today, there were bomb threats called into the local public schools, which had to be evacuated.
So, I mean, this you have this filtering effect where Trump says something in a debate and it triggers, the same kind of demonization of immigrants that we've seen for hundreds of years in this country, and it gives those forces of hate a target in a particular city, in a particular place, and to target a particular class of people. And it's just sort of the worst of America that we're seeing play out in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, the worst of America turned against the best of America, because as you
Well,
say, this is one of these Rust Belt towns, not that dissimilar from Wilkes-Barre as it happens, that has suffered catastrophic population loss,
right.
declining services, like they couldn't even afford to keep the roads paved, and just that classic thing where you end up with not nearly enough workers to support a largely elderly retired population. And so just the whole thing kind of collapses in on itself. And the new residents had totally turned things around. It's funny. I was watching a little news report on this, and they had interviews with a bunch of, largely white, in fact, exclusively white business owners and like church leaders and stuff, and
Mm-hmm,
the
mm-hmm.
business guys were like, wow, these guys are great, they show up to work, they don't have drug problems. Like JD Vance talks about it in his book about how poor white people are useless. And the church pastor, one of these, like an Episcopal church or something, was saying that for the first time in decades we have increasing population, we have more um people in the pews. It's like we thought we are gonna have to close this place down. And it's like, yeah, we're into, like, as happened so many other times and places in American history, just integrating a new group of people who just want to, get a job and have a decent standard of living. And it was working out until a bunch of racist jackoffs decided to just spread a completely ridiculous lie, just transparently racist lie, and now it's spreading all over the country. You have the Elon Musk and Donald Trump are posting these AI generated images of like kittens and ducks and stuff. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd like to see Donald Trump actually holding a real cat. I don't think he would like that very much. And
He's
the
the first president without a pet in the White House in like 40 years or something like that. He has no kind of human emotions available to him.
Bill
Um,
Arizona with there was like a ripoff of a Chick-fil-A ad with like AI generated kittens saying eat less
yeah.
kittens or something like that. I mean, just disgusting,
Well,
despicable.
it kind of unleashes this behavior,
Yeah.
right? We saw this, 4 years ago in these debates where you had so like the example I can think of is when Trump said, what was it, stand back and stand by
Hmm.
in the debate, and the Proud Boys took that as a signal that he was calling out to them and saying that they had to mount up for the revolution or whatever crazy things they believe. And it's the same kind of thing. This unleashes, this gives, this enables this kind of behavior to flourish where at one point it was suppressed. Now it's very much out in the open. And we've seen this over and over again since Trump came into public life in 2015. It has brought, the fringes to the mainstream of the Republican Party discourse. And this is just one more example. And I think what we're going to see, what we're going to hear from these communities is the human cost of that. The human cost of that is now, you know, uh, uh, hardworking people who are here legally who now are afraid to walk the streets, who are afraid to send their kids to school, who are maybe afraid to go to the job that they were working hard at that was helping the communities thrive. It's really a sad commentary.
Yeah, with no small amount of collateral damage too. These schools that keep getting closed this week are not 100% Haitian. Plenty of white families. So,
Right.
yeah, I have to go to work. What do I do with my kid? Just because some Yahoo saw Donald Trump post on Truth Social and now is, I guess defending America by trying
Yeah.
to fight a pogrom against, you know,
And I guess the triggering event for this was, a young kid who was in a school bus that was hit in an accident by, it wasn't intentional, it was an accident. And the individual who hit this bus was a Haitian immigrant, clipped the bus goes into a ditch, and one child dies tragically. And his father is now out saying publicly, stop talking about this. Stop stop inciting this hate in our community. I don't want to be connected to this. I don't want you to use my son, my dead son, for these political purposes. So I mean, it's just sad across the board.
Yeah. Boy, that's a real capstone on it too, that like for the last 10 years, the number of traffic fatalities has skyrocketed. More pedestrians and cyclists and
Yeah,
vehicle drivers and passengers have been getting killed on the road every year since like 2010. And it's because of poor regulation. The streets
right.
are filled with these, big SUVs and especially trucks that are going too fast on these roads. And you get in a crash and it's a disaster. Like nothing more American than immigrating to the US and getting in an accident, like that's a literally like minute by minute occurrence on American streets. And they just picked one of these. Oh, only Haitians have ever crashed a car in this country. It's really depraved. That's a real problem that requires solutions other than like racist demagoguery. Um,
Yeah, I realize I hit a bugaboo of yours, very particular bugaboo of
the
yours.
trucks.
But you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And that was kind of the triggering event for this. So So yeah, we could probably go line by line in this debate and go over these things where Trump was baited and Harris got the upper hand. We're starting to see a couple polls come out of this. I think the line debates don't matter has been put to bed by the fact that the debate in June ended someone's political career, right? So debates clearly matter. They may matter more in the social media world where clips continue to have a life offline outside the 90 minutes of the debate. The Harris campaign is using a lot of these clips in their advertising. They obviously think this was a big win. They wanted the Harris yesterday in North Carolina said, let's have another one. Trump said, no, I don't want to because I won. I don't want to do it again. So he's chickening out of another option here, another debate. But the question, I guess, is, we still come back to the steady state of a very tight race. And prior to this debate, there was a lot of gnashing of teeth around, the polls that liberal America takes with totemic significance, the New York Times poll in particular. And there's still, a very viable path to victory for Trump. And the question is, does this debate, even if it's a total depantsing, will it ultimately be a factor 50 odd days from now?
Yeah, it is bewildering. You have Trump having been convicted of 34 felonies. He is apparently, by all accounts, not really running a ground game with like canvassers and whatnot. Uh, he is constantly saying incredibly racist stuff. His vice president is historically unpopular. Um, and it's Trump, and yet the race, if you believe the polls, is basically tied and has been more, bouncing a few points Harris, a few points Trump. Yeah, boy, you weep for the virtue of the people, I guess. I think that it definitely will matter. I don't think it can matter in the way that the Biden debate happened because you can't have what happened after the Biden debate, which is an absolute tsunami of negative media coverage, led by the New York Times, basically demanding that he, drop out. And that, basically it was innumerable articles and pieces on television and so forth, and also a total panic attack among Democratic Party members and officials who basically were like, we can't win with this guy, we got to get somebody else, and that naturally is going to have an effect on the polling. Now, of course, that, it seems, was the right move because Harris is doing better than Biden was in the polls. But I would just cannot possibly believe that anything like that would happen for Trump, either on the party side or on the media side. He's been getting some negative media coverage. I mean, how else could you even write about this? But it's nothing at all like what happened after Biden. There's no just like absolute tsunami of coverage saying this man is unfit to be president, and when will he drop out? When will he drop out? That's just not
Right.
how the big time media approaches Republican candidates of any type. It doesn't matter what they say. So
Yeah, I mean, let's unpack that a little bit, and I want to get back to the ground game stuff, and I want to answer this question we have from Jared. But to start, um, I think it's actually really interesting. So in June, you had a major party candidate who is very old have a rough time in a debate, and its party members drove a panic attack. You could talk about whether it was centered in the media or the party, but in some ways, it's hard to disaggregate. And led ultimately to leaving of the race. So in this case, you have a major party candidate who is old, have real problems keeping up in a debate. And the response from the party, which would create the feedback loop, is the moderators were biased, and I'm gonna cherry pick this online poll that says we won. Right? That's kind of been the intellectual response from the right to what happened on Tuesday. And the Republicans used to call themselves the party of personal responsibility, right? But what it amounts to now is a party that blame shifts and finger points anytime anything goes bad for them. And that comes directly from Trump himself, who has never taken responsibility for anything in his life. And so the party now is a reflection of the individual, who is the direct opposite of this notion of the party of personal responsibility. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is, let's answer this question from Jared. Do either of you think Trump will lose the young men of color he's gained after that? I assume that meaning debate. I'm reminded of the 2013 autopsy report. The GOP might not learn from it until the 2030s. Well, we definitely have seen a huge gender gap open up in this election, and Trump was gaining among African American and Latino, particularly younger men, and I think those two things are related. And we're going to have a piece in our next issue. By the way, we've just to sneak preview this for everybody. This is what Ryan and I have been working on for the last several weeks. We have two issues coming in October. Sort of a kind of when your favorite band would put out a double album. We're putting out a double album in October. One is going to be focused on the election a lot, and one is going to be focused on the states. And we'll give you more information about that when we have it. We'll start rolling those out in the next week or so. But one of the pieces that we have coming in the election issue is about this with young men, and how it's widened over time. And it's not. This is the reason why I'm answering this the way I'm answering it, which is, I don't think Trump is going to lose some of this boosted vote among young men, even young men of color, is because it's not unique to the United States. That globally, we've seen younger men drift towards a more populist manner of thinking, a more right-wing populist specifically. I don't want to say just populist, right-wing kind of authoritarian, nationalist way of thinking. And in the U.S., it's characterized by, I guess, what's called the manosphere, this collection of podcasts and websites that cater to the sensibilities of young men, which Trump and Vance have latched onto, and they are, appearing on these shows. They are whipping up these audiences. They are catering to them in many ways. And we see that as much in a global context, maybe not with the same players, but we're seeing that same drift. So for those reasons, I think that that's probably likely to continue. Whether it has an impact or can be offset by older voters or women, remains to be seen. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, if you believe the polls, that's why Trump is sort of neck and neck, because there's been double digit swings to Trump among, minorities, and especially younger minorities, and people's like under 35. Um, I think one reason I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say I disbelieve the polls exactly. I don't want to unskew, but I also would not be surprised if that turns out to be something of a mirage because, as you say, David, this is definitely an international trend, but the trend from the US would be like this would be a massive change from 2022 or even 2023, where Democrats did pretty well among their traditional demographics of, minorities and young people. And to see like a almost Civil Rights Act-esque swing in the minority vote based on Donald Trump, um, while he is just constantly spewing this gutter racism, stuff that, is like Jamel Bouie was saying on Blue Sky that would make George Wallace blush. Like Trump's been hanging out with Laura Loomer, who's a
Yeah.
9/11 truther, so racist that Marjorie Taylor Greene called her out for being racist.
Right.
She said something like the White House is going to smell like curry all the time.
Yes.
Just sicko stuff that is just undeniable, even for somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene. And at
Right.
the same
Yeah.
time,
She's the responsible one in the Republican Party as it stands right
the,
now.
the moderate, we must,
Yeah. The moderate center, the sensible center of the Republican Party.
um, but yeah, and at the same time, polling has gotten dramatically more difficult, even since like 2020, because of the avalanche of spam communications and texts and especially calls. Hardly anybody
And
pays.
particularly young people, right? I mean, who don't have landlines and yeah.
These demographics of minorities and young people are the very hardest ones to poll. And they're having to, increase their response rates have fallen by like 2 orders of magnitude since 2016, I believe, something like that. Um, and so, I don't think you can say, well, the polls are fake, we're winning, don't have to do anything. I think, at the end of the day, this is probably going to be a very close election, especially here in Pennsylvania where I live. If the
Yeah.
campaign crap that I'm getting on a daily basis is any judge. Uh, but
Are you getting, because this can bring us into the ground game stuff, and then I'll get to the question from Chris that we have in the chat. But um, are you getting this surfeit of mailers that are pro-Trump mailers from outside groups?
I have gotten, or actually, they've been addressed to my wife. But yeah, I've gotten several of them. I wouldn't say as many as some. A buddy of mine who lives down the street and has a similar political record. He's a Bernie Elizabeth Warren guy. He's been
Mhm.
every day.
Yeah.
And yeah, from out of state, I believe from Florida. The if you look up the little postcode thing, about how Trump has nothing to do with Project 2025. Trump is going to protect Social Security and Medicare. Very sort of moderate-y type of messaging, but sent to what I would assume is an absolutely rock solid Democratic partisan. The same thing is true of my wife, so you wonder how
Right.
good their targeting operation is.
Well, this is the question, and not to lapse back into editor writer mode, but you should write about this. But seriously, because I've heard this, and Josh Marshall has been writing about this a little bit. Um, there is this avalanche of these. They're from outside groups who can't coordinate with the campaign. They are mostly in the form of mailers, and they are being messaged kind of willy nilly. They're not targeting it. They don't appear, let's say, and maybe they are targeting in some mad way, but they don't appear to be targeted toward any particular subgroup of voters, whether it's moderates or trying to get out pro-Trump voters that didn't vote in the last election or something like that. They just seem to be blasting these things. They all seem to come from the same PO box, like you mentioned, the same area in Florida, and they're just being thrown. Who knows how many millions of dollars is being spent into these campaigns, and a good portion of it just feels like it's being wasted. And it doesn't have a precedent in prior elections. There's nobody who's like, oh yeah, I used to get these in 2020 or 2016, or Mitt Romney super PACs were sending these to me in 2012. Like, no, like this has never happened before, and it seems like the product of political operations that do not have like an experienced strategy in mind when they're just mass mailing these things to random Democrats.
Yeah, I guess, it's hard to say given it's so unprecedented. Um, that because these are like nice mailers, they're like big,
Yeah.
12 inches across on like nice cardstock. And, I have to imagine to send out tens of millions of those things would be not cheap. This isn't a mass texting operation or whatever.
And
Uh,
not once. You're saying every day.
Every day, yeah, not for me, but for my buddy. And I've heard from similar people. Some of the staff at Wilkes University are getting these things. Yeah, I heard story. I think Josh Marshall actually mentioned this. The folks in North Carolina who are either Democratic Party operatives or actual elected members of the Democratic caucus in the
Right.
state legislature are getting
Are
these.
are getting his mail. I mean, that, at some point you would cull them from the list. If you were an experienced political operative, you'd say, "Oh, Roy Cooper's on this list. Maybe I'll take him off. I don't think he's gettable as a Trump vote."
Yeah. But I guess my question is if you basically just have infinite money, who knows how much is behind this stuff, and you just figure who cares about targeting? We'll just send them
Right.
to literally everyone. And
Could be.
you'll hit the people that otherwise, you would struggle to even find out who they are. You just send to every address on the block. Maybe it could work. I'm not sure, or
It could very well be, and maybe it's more effort than it's worth to identify the who. Now, I mean, a strategy of sending a mailer every day. I live in California, where we get very few ads on contentious races. It's almost all mailer based, and there's some propositions. This is mostly in the realm of propositions. Obviously, not statewide candidates who are, Democrats are going to win those seats, but I don't remember getting a mailer every day from, that would seem to be overkill. It would annoy me
yeah.
if I was an undecided voter, let's say. Getting a mailer every goddamn day would start to annoy me. And I don't know if these are the same. It seems uncoordinated. It seems like, okay, we're going to send our mailer, and then this other group, Defending Freedom, is going to send their mailer, and then Freedom Defending is going to send their mailer, and then some other iteration of those words is going to send their mailer, and it ends up being this avalanche, and it seems like there's diminishing returns to that.
Yeah, the other piece of evidence I would say points to the amateur hour theory is that a bunch of these, the ones that I've got, maybe half of them are about how Trump doesn't have anything to do with Project 2025. And I'm pretty sure, I'm not a political messaging expert by any stretch of the imagination, but that is sort of like rule number 2 or 3 and what not to do in any kind of political messaging. If you're trying to distance yourself from something, don't deny it directly, because then you're just saying you're putting Trump and Project 2025 in the same, in the
Yeah,
minds of the people reading this. And
right,
for anybody who is at all curious, you go and you look this up, and you're like, well, Project 2025, it's all written by the
right.
Trump. Well, this guy's lying. You want to distract the voter. Don't try to
Well,
put.
the other thing, yeah, I mean, if I'm a voter who doesn't know about this, and it says Trump is not at all associated with Project 2025, my first question is, wait, what's Project 2025? And so I'm immediately going to go and try to find out what the hell this is, and it's going to say, oh, 100 Trump operatives wrote this document. So yeah, I think, yeah, strategically it seems weird. And then just to build on that, uh, the actual turnout operation. So we're talking about mailers, we're talking about the means of communication, but the get out the vote operations apparently, and this was a big reason why the RNC is now run in part by Trump's daughter-in-law, is that uh, the Trump operatives, people, associates around Trump, people in Trump world, wanted to outsource those get out the vote operations basically to Charlie Kirk, who's what's the organization that
Turning,
Charlie Kirk runs?
turning.
Turning Point, right? Turning Point. And they appear to have no experience getting out the vote in any election at all, let alone a federal presidential election. But he wants to have them do all of the get out the vote operation. Let them handle everything, and have the RNC fund them to do that. And Ronna McDaniel, who was the head of the RNC, said, that sounds crazy. I don't want to do that. And they said, okay, goodbye. You're not doing this anymore. And we're going to install Trump's daughter-in-law. And now that is off and running. And there are enough, flashing red signs that this outsourcing is a really misguided idea. And, obviously, ground game in a close election does have the potential to be determinative. If these races are decided by 100,000 votes or less, and you're much, much worse at the ground game than your opponent, that could be a real factor.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, if viewers don't know, Charlie Kirk is this notorious grifter, just a classic loudmouth demagogue who ran, these
Right.
operations on college campuses that were just about like trolling the libs, basically. As far as I can tell, he has no experience running what is like a massive, logistically complicated operation.
Right.
I was involved at the Obama ground game in a tiny way. Like I volunteered, out in Southwest Colorado to knock doors. And, there were like probably 50 people involved in that. And they had these whole elaborate lists of addresses they would give you, the books or whatever they call it. And you go and you'd knock each one and you'd, mark, whether they were persuadable and whatnot. You'd probably convince maybe like 3 people to vote for Obama. It's probably the most effective, political act I've ever carried out. But I have gotten door knocked here in Wilkes from a Harris person. Haven't seen hide nor hair of any Trump people. And
Right.
this, Luzerne County was the swing county in 2016. One of the few
There you
counties
go.
from Obama to Trump. And you would think that this, given the amount of money's swirling around and the fact that both presidential campaigns are coming to this relatively small city, that you would have lots of people, but nothing so far.
Nothing yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you have this profile of Charlie Kirk, who the experience in running a ground game operation at a statewide level or a federal level anywhere is zero, but experience in grifting is high. like, what do you think he's going to do with that money, right? What is your expectation level here? And I remember, in 2012 when Mitt Romney's team had they had allegedly invented some new technology that was going to make them be able to get out the vote on election day better than anybody else, and it broke, and it basically didn't work that day at all. And I'm just having flashbacks to that when I think about this, but at a much higher level. Like at least the Romney team had people in place to actually do that. Just the technology failed. This seems much, much worse. That it could be a take the money and run scenario, right? So that's, I think, an interesting and undercovered part, and we will be covering it at prospect.org. So let's get to this question from Chris. So he writes, Biden was such a surprise with respect to the progressive nature of his domestic policies. Is it foolish to hope Harris will continue this? How essentially progressive are Democrats now? So, I mean, this is a big question, something we've been exploring at the Prospect, ever since Harris was, anointed the nominee. I think there, certainly at the time that she was nominated, there wasn't a whole lot to go on this front. She was obviously part of the administration that put forward a lot of these progressive domestic policies, but she wasn't closely associated to very many of them. And then we started seeing some of these advisors come in. We had, her brother-in-law being the chief legal officer of Uber. We had this woman, Karen Dunn, who was the one of her debate prep people. And debate prep, it's just essentially a campaign volunteer, so I don't want to make too much of this, but she also is on the other side of the Biden-Harris Justice Department, giving the opening statement for Google in an antitrust trial this week, literally the day before the debate. So, and then you had all these calls from people like Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, and other people to fire Lena Khan. So, there's sort of a lot of questions up in the air. Now, since then, we've seen a limited rollout of some economic policies from Harris, and I think they straddle the line. And I think once again, it's kind of like, what do you want to see in this melange? So, on the one hand, she's asked for a federal price gouging law, which would empower the FTC. She's talked about algorithmic price fixing in rental markets. There's now a lawsuit against RealPage, which is the company that engages in that in many rental markets around the country. She then has put out things that are kind of gimmicky, like no taxes on tips, which is great for the very tiny subset of people who actually have federal taxation exposure and are tipped workers, which are then like sort of the upper class of actual low wage workers. They're retail workers that make $10 an hour that don't get any tips, and so wouldn't benefit from that policy. Why are they in a different category than people that happen to get tips? But in her policy rollout, she also said, let's get rid of the sub minimum wage, which is actually a really good way to help a certain class of tipped workers. So I think there's been a give and take here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the selection of Tim Walz was definitely a signal, whether honest or not. Like basically what Walz did in Minnesota as governor was he was sort of like Biden, previously quite a moderate Democrat in Congress, because he represented a very, an increasingly Trumpy district as the years passed from 2006 on.
Mhm.
And Yet as governor, basically passed a state level version of the Build Back Better program, the with lots of, union benefits and, some renewable energy stuff, legal marijuana, um, and a universal school lunch, on and on and on, a whole bunch of stuff. And, that kind of suggests that if Harris can, depending on Congress, she would sort of take another bite at more or less what Biden set up, that I think above all, where Harris seems to be concerned with family policy. And that was the big missing thing, the big thing that didn't get through, that was actually
Right.
knocked down because the American Rescue Plan had this very important expansion of the child tax credit, which made families without any labor income eligible for the first time, and it cut child poverty more or less in half, depending on the data source you want to trust. But it definitely took a huge bite out of child poverty, but it was not, it was set to expire. That was kind of foolish in retrospect. And Joe Manchin would not vote for it a second time. But he's not going to be in the Senate. And so, you could see, I think, she wants to bring that back. She also wants to add a $6,000 tax credit for newborns,
First year.
yeah, one-off payment for new parents. And that would be the yeah, I think that, uh, immigration, she would probably be pretty bad, like Biden has been kind of bad. Might see some improvement in Gaza, though I wouldn't expect like a total, about face, just maybe some more pressure on Netanyahu.
Right.
But I think that, if she can, Harris would pass a great big expansion of family benefits that would cut child poverty by a lot. And I think that would be, especially if you designed it right, better. We can do better than a tax credit. We can make this
You
a
just
child allowance.
you
Uh,
just hit it. One of the ways I think maybe if Harris is looking to distinguish herself from Biden on these policies is smarter implementation. So a good example that you just brought up, the way that the child tax credit in 2021 was distributed was through the IRS, and that meant the take up rate was not universal,
yep.
because you had to know that you had to, even if you didn't have tax liability, you had to in some way register a tax form with the IRS in order to be eligible for that monthly benefit. And a lot of people didn't, particularly poor people in hard to reach areas. I know there were efforts like outside of government at the grassroots level to try to tell people you have to do this. But I mean, how civil society is only going to be able to get so far with that. The way to fix that is to run it through the Social Security Administration, and if you do that, people would not need to be in the tax system in order for them to get the benefit. They would just need to have a Social Security number, and which everyone does. So it would allow for near universal, if not universal, take up, so that we get this benefit out to people who need it, who may not otherwise know about it. So, there are ways that she could distinguish herself with smart take up, things like that. Now, one thing that we're going to be working on in the next, and then I'll get to the other questions to wrap this up. One of the things we're going to be working on in the next few weeks is, look, I mean, I don't think we can sugarcoat the fact that it's going to be very difficult to get a Senate majority. John Tester is not looking great in Montana right now. Maybe he'll surprise and pull it out. But if he doesn't win, even if Democrats win the toss-up or leaning, close seats everywhere else, and there are a lot of them, and if they lose Montana, they'll probably have 49 votes in the Senate. There's interesting stuff in Nebraska in a race that we've covered where there's an independent who hasn't said who he would caucus with, who could win. He's neck and neck in the polls. There, these sort of fantastical pickup opportunities in places like Texas and Florida. I'm not buying it totally, but it's likely that there won't be a majority of Democrats in the Senate. And so at that point, you think, well, what is Harris going to be able to do if she doesn't have Congress? And 5 years ago, we kind of thought that was going to be what was going to happen with what eventually became Joe Biden. Nobody necessarily foresaw winning both seats in Georgia that year. There was an expectation that they were going to not have the Senate. And, what happened in that circumstance? We wrote a thing called the Day One Agenda that said, actually, there's a lot you can do with existing authority. And, to his credit, Biden has done quite a bit of that. But there's more left to do. And it's even more fraught now because some of the things Biden did manage to accomplish by executive authority were overturned in the courts. And the courts are getting more emboldened. They're getting much more willing to step in and intervene in these things. So we're going to be writing sort of a renewed Day One agenda to identify some of these other areas where policy changes could be made and address the problem of the courts. Okay, so look for that, prospect.org. We only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to go rapid fire through some of these questions. We have a question from Harriet. What do you think Harris's policy will be on Ukraine? You can answer this probably better than I, Ryan, but from my angle, I haven't seen really any kind of variance between her policy and Biden's policy.
No, she's met a lot with Zelensky. She seems to be a very firm Ukraine supporter. I don't see any change there.
Right. I mean, the question is, what is that policy? I mean, the policy is just fund them and let them work it out. And we saw an incursion by Ukraine into Kursk, but it certainly wasn't an advance enough to end the war or anything or get people to the table. It seems like an unending stalemate. And loss of a lot of lives. I just don't know what. Obviously, there's a policy of just saying, "Okay, Putin, you take a bunch of territory." That's not tenable because it will just be emboldening. But at the same time, I don't know what the policy really is right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you'd see is just continuation of more and more material deliveries, above all artillery shells. Ukraine has really been suffering from the artillery drought, thanks to Congress not passing any aid for like 6 months. And I think the Kursk thing was about demonstrating that they still have some fight left in them and that it's worth continuing, to support, since there's not the appetite in the United States to just basically give Ukraine whatever they want. But they have, so far, fighting Russia to a draw. Eventually, they're going to run out of Soviet, era junk, and could be like 2026 from what I've been in reading. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's just
It just
basically,
seems like a war of attrition, and it's I mean, I don't know what the policy should be, but that's another one where Trump refused to say that he was in favor of Ukraine winning the war during the debate, right?
yeah, shut them off
And
for
then
sure.
one last thing, real quick. Multiple people apparently have questions for us about AOC's criticism of Jill Stein. I don't really have much on that. I thought it was interesting that Jill Stein decided to go on to the Breakfast Club without knowing how many members seated in the House of Representatives, and like really basic kind of civic questions. I'd like to see more candidates get basic questions on civics. I think that would be very illuminating and enlightening. But I don't. I think people are making a story where they're, just
Yeah,
isn't much.
I don't know what in 2016, right? Jill Stein raised like $7 million or something like that to do a recount of the election supposedly, and then just took the money and didn't do it. Um, the Green Party just hasn't the structure of American society, the electoral system is such that third parties are de facto illegal. They exist, but they basically
Yeah,
can't. They spend all their money just staying on the ballot, and the Green Party hasn't accomplished anything in like ever since I've been politically aware.
yeah.
They've maybe raised the salience of things here or there, but you compare that with Bernie Sanders running in the Democratic primary in 2016, that changed everything. That was huge. And I think that,
Yeah.
third parties, especially by, frankly, kind of griftery people like Jill Stein, it's just not worth the effort.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I would use the disclaimer. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing that third parties are de
No,
facto
it's
illegal, but
terrible.
it's terrible, but it's the reality,
Yeah.
and so you have to work within the system you have while trying to get to the system you want.
Yeah.
And so I think your analysis is spot on.
And there are ways
Okay,
doing that, but fair vote, you change to ranked choice voting, how the system is designed, you could get third parties, and I think that would be a great thing.
absolutely. All right, we're out of time. We're over time. Ryan Cooper, thank you very much. We will be back next week. Please visit prospect.org. We will have this conversation up there later today. And thank you for being here, and have a good weekend.
Bye bye, everyone.